Now let's see how these techniques were used to elevate 8 houses that were substantially damaged by Hurricane Andrew. We'll start with Technique 1. The first house we'll look at has masonry walls and a slab-on-grade foundation. It was flooded by several feet of water and suffered extensive damage. The owner decided to raise the lowest floor above the flood level by extending the walls and placing sand fill on top of the original slab floor and pouring a new, elevated concrete slab on top. Here we see the front of the house at the beginning of the project. All of the interior walls and contents have been removed, and sand has been placed on top of the old slab. The concrete blocks that will be used to extend the walls can be seen in the foreground. In this view from the back of the house, we can see that the walls have been extended with concrete blocks. The plywood visible at the tops of the walls is used to form cast-in-place concrete bond beams that will strengthen the extended walls. The roof trusses, shown in the foreground, were salvaged for reinstallation. The owner of this house decided to replace the original roof sheathing and shingles with new materials. Here again, we see the extended walls. The vertical cuts in the walls next to the windows are for concrete tie-down columns that will be cast in place to further strengthen the extended walls. The owner of this house was able to meet the elevation requirement by raising the floor only a few feet. Looking through the garage door opening, we can compare the levels of the elevated slab floor in the background and the unelevated garage floor. The roof has been rebuilt with salvaged trusses, and most of the new concrete slab has been poured on top of the sand fill. The open area in the foreground, where plastic sheathing and wire reinforcement can be seen on top of the sand fill, is where the remaining part of the slab will be poured. As work progresses, the elevated house begins to take shape. The bottoms of the original window openings are raised with concrete blocks. Windows and doors are added, and the amount of elevation can now be seen clearly. Interior partition walls and utilities are added. This view from the rear of the house shows that the project is almost complete. The final product, an attractive, elevated house that meets local floodplain management requirements and is now much less vulnerable to flood damage. The second house for which Technique 1 was used is similar to the first, and the modifications made are much the same. For this house, we'll look at some construction details. For example, this view from under the new porch roof shows how the roof framing has been securely tied to the extended wall with metal hurricane straps. These straps will help the roof resist the uplift forces caused by high winds. Here we see the wood framework for a new concrete staircase that will provide access to the elevated floor. After the new concrete slab is poured, wood framing for the interior walls is added, and the electrical system is upgraded to meet current code requirements. As the project nears completion, the amount of elevation can be seen clearly. In this house, as in the first, the level of the garage floor remains unchanged. The elevated house is now complete. In the third house for which Technique 1 was used, the lowest floor was raised only about 1 foot. Otherwise, the work performed was essentially the same, with a few minor exceptions. For example, the roof of this house was removed as a single piece. The trusses were held together with bracing and portions of the original sheathing. This approach made it easier to reinstall the roof at the end of the project. After the roof was removed and the interior gutted, the walls of this house were extended and a new bond beam added at the top. Here we see the new bond beam at the top of the extended wall, the new concrete tie-down column at the corner, and the raised window opening. These views from the back and front of the house show the height of the elevated slab floor. The owner of this house decided to use light gauge metal framing for the new interior walls. Here we see the final product. As in the first two houses, the garage floor remains at the original level. The relatively small amount of elevation required for this house has altered its appearance very little.